Hello and welcome everybody to the Dallas Film Podcast. We are thrilled today to have animation expert, pro, long time. I'm not even sure how to describe you. You've done so much in the industry. James Lopez. James has worked for Disney Animation and Warner Brothers and done a lot of stuff in the animation world for a number of years. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me. Usually I think sometimes I describe myself as a Disney veteran, but also a jack of all trades and master of none. But
yeah, it's great. When I was looking at your resume, I'll ask you, kind of how you got started and everything, but looking at your resume, it's such a wide variety of things, from storyboards to backgrounds to character illustrations, previs. You've kind of done a little bit of all of it.
Yeah. I started out primarily wanting to be an animator, and for most of my career, that's the role that I served in. But through the course of the career, with sometimes being in between jobs and stuff, I definitely moved around a lot between different disciplines. So, mostly when I was at Disney, I was primarily I would say just an animator. I pretty much just animated, although, I did have, being a supervisor at Disney, there was a element of having to do character design for the characters that I worked on. So I got experience, with that. But then when I took up other jobs, it would be outside of Disney. It would be for other things, like, or a storyboard on a short, or a storyboarding on a TV show. One time it was even developing, the production design for an animated sequence in a live action film. All these things just kind of came, and I just always accepted it. I never said, I can't do that. I'm just an animator. Or that's not my thing. The way I always took my career is like, oh wow, this is a neat new challenge, and I'll give it a try.
Yeah, I like that, and I mean, it really, I think what it stems from, and and I'll ask you kind of what your background is and how you got started. But overall, you're just an artist, right? And so whatever the medium, or like you said, the discipline is that you're working in, you're just still an artist doing what artists do. So talk a little bit about kind of, you said 30 years ago you got started in the animation world and worked for Disney Animation for a long time. But what led you down that path, like as a kid and a young adult and everything, kind of getting into animation? How did all this start for you?
Yeah, well, it really goes all the way back to when I was practically a toddler, and ever since I can remember, since I could hold a pencil, I've always loved to draw. Like, my mom saved my drawings back to when I was like 4 years old. Of my drawings, and I've never pretty much stopped. Since then, I always knew that that's what I would want to be or want to do. I guess the big question was, how viable was that as a career? Back in the 70s, and early 80s, animation was arguably at something of a lull. It wasn't, it was definitely, there were definitely professionals working in it, but it wasn't that big. You know what I mean? I think what happened was really while I was in high school, when Who Framed Roger Rabbit and The Little Mermaid, those two movies came out and seemed to be pretty big blockbusters. That I think that's what happened at that time is, kind of like good, perfect timing, where the industry boomed just as I was graduating high school and entering college, which would be Cal Arts,
Right.
To learn animation. Because before then, I wasn't sure if I would go into animation. I thought, it didn't seem to be like a career move. I thought I'd probably be going into something like advertising, which involves some element of creativity, but seemed like it was more prominent and more present, as a career goal, as opposed to Saturday morning cartoons,
Yeah, well, and it's really interesting because if you think about it, there really was that lull in feature animation, like you talked about through the 70s and 80s. Once, I don't know exactly when it happened, but when you stopped having animated shorts prior to the feature films at some point, probably in the 1960s, I think it was. And animation, and really entertainment changed a lot. And the advent of television and the Saturday morning cartoon kind of killed the need for that feature animation. And so, I mean, as a kid who also grew up in the 70s and 80s, the Saturday morning cartoons that's a real thing. Like it didn't matter if there wasn't school, you were up early anyways because you wanted to catch all of that on Saturday mornings. And then Little Mermaid, that's the turning point, right? That's where everything changed, timing wise. And Disney was like, oh, this is a cash cow. What can we do here? Let's
and at that time it was like the industry was like there were more jobs than there were candidates to fill them. So it was very easy to get in at that time. It was like, oh, you can barely draw. Get over here.
And you started still in the days of hand-drawn animation. So that was how you started, was hand-drawn animation. So for our listeners and myself, talk a little bit about the differences on how that's changed, like the difference between hand-drawn animation back in the early 90s, say, to the way that it's done now.
Well, let me see. I mean, it's my experience, my take on it really was really deals more with being able to use your own devices to create this thing versus somebody else's devices. Meaning that, like, when I was doing hand-drawn, I could come up with literally anything. It seemed like the parameters only existed within my own imagination. But when I was first being exposed to computer animation going into it, what I found is it somewhat limiting because I felt like I could only work with the mouse shapes that were given to me. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
And the expressions that whatever the slider would allow.
Right.
So for me, it was really dealing with the compromise of saying, well, this isn't what I would do, but this is what I kind of have to do. Whereas before, it was like only limited by what I knew how to do. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
But that was really kind of the thing. I know a lot of that has probably changed now because with the advancement of the controls and stuff, over time, it has really allowed the animator to really apply their own design sensibility into the rig and the performances more than it was when its first inception, when it first came on to the scene. So, and I know for my friends, it recalls conversations where, for them it was a godsend because it took the aspect of drawing out of the equation. They hated to draw. They really did, but it was a means to an end because it allowed them to do animation. So with the advent of CG, it's like, oh, thank God, it was a godsend because it's like now I don't have to draw anymore, but I can still participate in this animation thing. Whereas for me, it was all about the drawing. Right. That's what I loved, you see, and that's taken away. And then it was like, it's weird. It was like Freaky Friday. It was like,
well, and that's really interesting because because you can still create hand-drawn animation now. People still do, and there are projects that are still hand-drawn. I think that what maybe many people don't realize is, we all know 24 frames per second or 30 frames per second. Well, you have to draw 24 separate pictures to illustrate that motion just for 1 second, and which is why you have different backgrounds. Somebody else designs the background and you're maybe just drawing the action or the characters and laying that in when it comes to hand-drawn. And even as a kid, I remember in the 70s and 80s watching those Saturday morning cartoons, and those were actually, those were obviously churned out much faster and at a lower quality rate and lower budgets. And so you would see the same backgrounds on Scooby-Doo over and over and over again. You're like, why? The character's running through the same background. What is happening here? And then when you figure it out, you're like, oh, okay, now that I know how animation works, that's a separate, they're drawing on cells and all this other kind of stuff that makes it different.
Yeah, back then, talking about my perception of it and getting into it, that was a hard thing for me to kind of figure out because I could tell that there was a distinct difference between Saturday morning and then the Disney feature, if you will, in the theater. There was definitely a difference there. And I didn't know about budgets back. I
Yeah.
was 8 years old. I didn't know that budgets played a hand in this. I just thought, well, that's TV, and that's why you go to the theater, I guess. Is that difference in quality or whatever it was. Maybe that's why you pay for it special before you walk in or something. I don't know. It didn't make sense to me. And so, I wasn't sure like how animation was even crafted. So I wasn't even sure how I would even be able to do it. I was so naive, being so young, thinking like, well, maybe they just draw really fast and you just don't see their hand on the screen. Like maybe that was the goal of being a animator, is to learn how to draw fast. I was so dumb.
Hey, and we're all little kids. We all are at that point in time. So you get to Cal Arts in late 80s, something like that, early 90s, and you start, figuring out that, hey, this is what I want to do. I do want to be an animator. Talk a little bit about what that journey and that process was like of kind of going Cal Arts and then, becoming a professional in the industry, how you got started.
Yeah, so it was neat. It's like finally I got into an environment in which I was surrounded by people that I could relate to, like-minded, like artists. Before it was in high school, and you took art because it was an easy A class, and there was no expectations of you. You know what I mean? I even had to come up with my own art assignments because my teacher could see that I was,
Yeah.
uh, destined for something more, but she didn't know how to provide for me.
Mm,
She didn't know anything about the subject. So
right.
I actually came up with my own assignments and did my own research, and went to the bookstore and picked up the books on like Illusion of Life and stuff like that, and did a lot of reading, and then finally get to Cal Arts, and where all of a sudden I feel like I caught up with my people.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah, when you're doing
and
more that the teacher's actually doing, this is not much of a
right.
challenge for you.
Right, exactly. So needless to say, I got an A in art. I was like, but then going into Cal Arts was interesting because it was, yeah, like it's good to talk about this because especially for young people, I was really chomping at the bit to figure this thing out. Partly because my finances at the time were such that I think, if I remember correctly, I was only able to afford 1 year of school
Oh,
unless I got student loans. So I kind of figured I have like 1 year shot at this. Like I've got to learn whatever it is I'm going to learn in this year, and then we're done. You know what I mean? So that's why I was really kind of like, attentive to my teachers and very, very focused. And so like, whereas a lot of my classmates, were going out and, socializing and stuff, there was me at my desk constantly just trying to get a hold of this thing,
you were the rare motivated 18-year-old.
Yes, exactly. But I was so driven, and it was hard looking back on it now, like thinking about my journey. It's kind of interesting how it happened because um, I went to school for 1 year, and then to my surprise, was picked up for a job. Um, after my first year.
Hmm.
That was kind of unheard of. I think the upperclassmen were kind of telling us like, oh, you at least have to be here 2 years before you're even considered. But keep in mind, again, like the boom of the industry was such where it was like, no, we need people. So I actually got a job after my first year of school. And here's the thing is that when I started the first day of my job, and how that happened was that CalArts had with a producer show at the end of the year. They invited, producers, production managers, supervisors of departments to come to the school. They had a special screening of all the films, as a film festival, and then had artwork on our wall as a form of like portfolio.
Hmm.
And then they would take notes, and then they would meet with the director, say, hey, we want to meet with so and so, so and so, and so and so in one of the conference rooms. And then we'd get, the director would come see us. We were all kind of hanging out in the corner somewhere, and they'd be like, hey, James, Santa wants you to pull their sleigh tonight. Like, okay.
So what was that first job in that first year of college?
It was Don Bluth Studios.
Oh, cool.
It was, yeah. And particularly, it was Ken Duncan, who, if you may be familiar, he was a Disney animator who animated Jane and Tarzan and Meg and Hercules. And he even has his own animation studio now called Duncan Studio, in which he did the animated sequences in the film Mary Poppins Returns.
Oh, very cool.
And so they brought him, the production manager brought him with him, as a consultant to say, tell me who's good here. And so Ken's work.
He's like, I'm not going to tell you about this one because I want him for myself.
Yeah. Well, the thing is that, Ken, he came and he saw what I was doing, and, and he wanted to meet with me. And I remember popping in my VHS tape to show my reel and show my stuff. And we talked a little bit, and then they offered me a position as an in-betweener. And I was to start the next week.
That's very cool. What is an in-betweener?
Oh, an in-betweener is like an assistant to like the main animator, in which, you know how you were saying earlier, how you have to do, what is it, 24 drawings in a second or something like that? Well, the animator, believe it or not, doesn't actually do all those drawings. You know what I mean? They do kind of the main ones that help continue the action. But if they have an assistant working with them, they usually can give that work to their assistant, who will basically fill in all of the in-between drawings to help the action look and feel more smooth, you think? Smooth flowing and stuff. So I would do those in-between drawings,
That's very cool. James, where do you live in California?
In Glendale,
okay.
Which is very close to like downtown Los Angeles.
Yeah, of course. And have you been out there for your entire career?
Pretty much, yeah. Like all of the major studios, like Glendale is right next door to Burbank, which is where Disney is, Warner Brothers, Dreamworks, except for Sony, which is like on the other side of town, which is always controversial, But most of the studios that are all in that Burbank, Glendale area. So I grew up in Orange County, kind of down by Disneyland, and then, when I moved out of the house, I moved out this way to, eliminate the commute.
Yeah, of course. Well, how has it changed over the years? Obviously, so much of the industry has gone to be, virtual and computerized and everything. When you first started, you were going into an office to animate. And at what point in time did that change where you could be at home and do you? I'm just assuming that you were able to work from home and you just digitally transmit everything that you're working on. But talk about kind of what that transition throughout your career has been like.
Yeah, well, I mean, today, now we all pretty much work remotely. But even in the past, when we didn't really have digital technology and we were working on even still paper, we would work at home a lot. And just off screen here, I have a desk at home. So, I had a desk specially made that had the same dimensions and everything as my desk at work, because I liked the configuration of my desk at work. So I had one made. And so often what I would do, sometimes it's good to be in the studio, but there's sometimes it's good to just kind of be away, without all of the potential interruptions. So there would be times where I would just kind of not take the day off, but I might leave early and take work home with me so that I could probably work on it either at home in my own seclusion or in my off hours. You know what I mean? Like sometimes I'd take advantage of the day to just go out and be outside, and then I'd work at night, or even late into the night, when no one was going to ever bother me because I like to, work uninterrupted many times. And at nighttime, at 1 in the morning is sometimes the best time to work because nobody's going to be like calling you. Nobody's going to be expecting you to go to the store, anything like that. You could just work, and it's just a different feeling, like you're getting stuff done while people are asleep. It's a weird thing, but um, yeah, so I like doing that. But yeah, then we would go in. Now with everybody kind of like at home, um, yeah, I still like it. I mean, you miss that dynamic, I guess, a bit of, getting together,
Yeah.
chatting, around the water cooler, even, going for lunches spontaneously. Now we have to kind of plan them a little bit more, that kind of a thing. So the social aspect is kind of a little bit different.
Yeah, the
But
camaraderie that you have with your,
yeah,
fellow animators. And a lot of times, creatively too, it does help to be in that in-person environment because you start having a conversation, somebody else pops in, and then you're just kind of going back and forth and you figure things out in a lot of scenarios. And sometimes if you're by yourself, and it's not, Zoom is never the same as being
right.
able to sit in a room and talk to people. So I totally understand that there's that's, I think just with any industry, it's good and bad, and there's benefits and detriments to both of them. Is there ever any time where you're going into an office now, or is it really just, hey, we're going to plan to get together, or maybe if you're just starting on a project, you have some in-person meetings, then it all goes remote from there.
It's like, this is so funny. Like, I would love to go into an office because that would mean I would have a job. I mean, I haven't worked like in a year now. I mean, the
Oh wow.
industry is in this. I don't know. I was just talking to a friend of mine about it. Like, what is going on? Because nowadays, I'm seeing posts through my news feed, Instagram and Facebook of people that are what they call open for work.
Mm.
That I'm surprised because I'm like, how is it that you're looking for work. Because people even tell me like, James, how are you out of work? I mean, like because they think I could just like call up Warner Brothers and just say, ta-da, here I am.
Give me a
And
job.
yeah, that's what my younger students think. And it's like, oh no, it is so not that. You know what I mean? Um, and the same thing, I look towards other people and I think that too. Like, aren't you getting calls like, spontaneously throughout the day? Or,
Well,
like,
the industry's in a real weird place right now, and I think a lot of it was post strike. And you would think, oh, okay,
yep,
animators, the strike is not going to affect animators. You're not WGA, you're not SAG, but
yeah,
but those are voice actors still that have to be doing things. And granted, a lot of that animation work is done before they come on board. But I think more importantly, and this is as a film commissioner, the conversations that I've been having is that none of the studios or streamers wanted to do anything until later this year, basically. They were all
yeah,
holding off on budgets. And honestly, it was just today we've started getting some calls.
mm,
Got an email from a streamer, got an email from a studio, had a meeting earlier with a big, another big production possibility that could be multiple things that want to start shooting. And so I think we're going to start seeing past June, once we get past June towards fourth quarter this year, that's when things are really going to pick back up there because it's just everybody's just waiting and they're just not spending
yeah,
money essentially.
yeah. Well, that's good to hear, and that's so funny because usually it's in the fourth quarter where everybody's funds are done or dried up, where it's like nothing's happening in the winter months. Everything happens seems like in the first quarter when they get their money again and stuff, and that's when things seem to start up. So yeah, I mean, if that's the case, well, as long as it comes back at some point, I guess. I mean, it's yeah. So talking about the whole missing the whole studio atmosphere. I mean. Yeah, it's such a larger conversation. It's like missing just the industry. You
Hmm.
know what I mean? It's like, what projects are going on and who are they have involved with them and how does one uh, get in on that and continue to participate and stuff. And especially like not being together. A lot of those conversations would have been had, in the hallways and stuff more easily, like where it's like, oh, hey, James, come here, come into my office. It'd be what? And then you'd have the thing like, hey, did you hear so and so is just starting up this or whatever? Like, no, like now it's like now you have to hopefully get a text
Right.
or a
Yeah.
random text or hey, let's go out to lunch this week. I'm like, why? Like, because I have something to tell you. I'm like, oh, like I wonder what this could be.
Yeah. Well, and so you've done so much that obviously you've done the feature side and you've done television work as well. And you've created your own series, I see, on your website too. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that one is Hullabaloo.
Yes. Uh-huh.
Yeah. Well, talk a little bit about that, about creating your own series and what this is, because it's on YouTube, at least episode
Yeah.
one. Do you have more than, well, just kind of talk about it and we'll talk through
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so it started probably about 10 years ago. It was really, a project that I wanted to do. And I guess I was starting to, pitch it around and kind of met with usual roadblocks, which, executives like either not getting it or wanting to turn it into their own thing and you
Mm-hmm.
lose creative control kind of stuff. Um, it was advised to me that time, said, James, you don't have to deal with this. I'm like, I don't. Tell me more. Uh, there's this thing called crowdfunding.
Yeah.
People are giving money to people to do projects just, more like this, and I remember, around that time, another popular animator, Aaron Blaze, who has his online presence. He calls himself a creature art teacher. He did a crowdfund campaign to do a pitch packet
Mm-hmm.
for a potential feature, and I saw the kind of support he got from that, which was incredible. And my first thought was, wow, like, but this is just for a pitch packet.
Yeah. Yeah.
A PDF of 12 slides. Let me. That's what you get for that. And I said, imagine what people might give you if you were to actually make the thing. You
Right.
know what I mean? Make an animated show, not beyond a pitch packet. I mean, an actual show, something that they could actually watch. And so, we did that. And when I say we, it was a friend that I befriended online, who was, I guess, kind of like a social media guru. I mean, she was really ahead of the curve when, online communities were kind of being formed.
Mm-hmm.
She kind of saw this coming and situated herself in a way to kind of create a community before they were really popular. And so she knew a lot about this. So she really kind of was the one to advise me on how to go about this thing, because I didn't know anything about it,
Yeah.
and I was coming at it from a very humble and meek artistic point of view, very insecure and stuff. And she could see that. And she said, okay, step aside and let me let me show you how this is done. And it's like, you got to go out there with confidence, you got to convince these people that your dream is worth making coming true,
Right.
and stuff like that. And there's a certain way of presenting yourself, of talking about your project that is beyond like, shrinking and going, hey guys, if you have any spare change, it would be great. No, you gotta go out there like boom, like, man, you guys would not believe this. This is your opportunity to join now, be a part of the best thing ever. You're blah blah blah. That's not artists by natural design. We're all, I'm not to speak generally, it's like, we're just not most of us are not of that height, So so she helped me kind of get out there, and sure enough, I got the support, unbelievable support to be able to make, a series of 4 short films that would ultimately become like a proof of concept
Hmm.
that I could take to, studios once again, but this time show them, like this is the proof of,
Yeah.
of what I intend to do with it, how it'll play out, how it'll feel, and even how people will respond to it,
So have you
like.
completed all four?
Yes, well, 3 and 0.999.
Okay, almost. Yeah.
There's a last one that still needs some like little finishing touches on, but it's really, kind of
Yeah.
really minor. So
So if we go on from your website, which for the audience that's listening is jameslopezanimation.com, you'll see right on the top of the page there, featured content, episode 1, Hullabaloo, The Great Race. And so are the first 3 episodes then on YouTube now, or you've got one and the others are coming as they're getting finished up?
yeah, not yet. The only one is up there now
Gotcha.
because I would have put the other ones up, but the episode 2, which it's not a linear storyline. I'm just calling it episode 2 because of the lack of creativity, believe it or not. I don't know, what would you call it? I don't know. But that one I had in mind to put into festivals,
Oh yeah.
uh, for award consideration and to get notoriety and presence that way. And if you're going to do that, it limits where you can
Yes.
post it. So you can't, post it on YouTube because if you're going to put in a festival, they're going to want some exclusivity out of it because well, how are we going to sell tickets to our festival when they could just go to your YouTube channel and watch it? No,
Yeah,
that.
I totally understand. I founded and have run a film festival in Florida for 19 years, and so we have our night. So I 100% understand that aspect of the industry for sure.
Right. But then there's another one that is going to come out, which is real short form, which was part of the proof of concept packet, it was one of our last stretch goals that we did on our crowdfund campaign, which was to create a short film that proves the concept of doing a potential series of short videos that are designed to showcase achievements of women in the fields of science and that kind of thing. So that'll be coming out on YouTube, very soon.
Cool.
But in the meantime, I also have planned other content. Like I just got done piecing together the rough animation version of episode 1. Because I heard people want to see, they like behind the scenes stuff, so they
Yeah.
want to see, like, yeah, it all looks great in color, but what did this look like when it first started? And so I'm kind of, pulling back the curtain on that a little bit, saying, well, here it is. And it is a bit self-conscious because it's like, I know people have seen work and stuff, so thankfully they'll be prepared for this. But there's always that be like,
Yeah.
this doesn't. I don't know, how does this look? But at the same time, it was kind of fun going back over it. And it's funny because just over my shoulder, I don't know if you could kind of see it in the frame, but I had to like dust off my old pencil test system. Um, and surprisingly enough, like I as I was producing this thing. I would shoot tests, but I wouldn't shoot total complete tests because a lot of times I was in a hurry. So I would shoot just enough to convince me that what I had working would work. So I never actually, shot a full, complete, rough test. So when I tried to put this reel together, I didn't have the material, but I have it all in boxes.
Yeah.
Some of which you might be able to see, but it's like they're all in boxes with rubber bands around them, and it's like I had to dig those out and literally spend like most of last week and stuff shooting tests over and over again, and it felt like I was making the film all over. It was weird in a haunting way, and it's like, but they also realized that even the software that I was using back then, now that I have a new computer, doesn't run on the new OS system,
Mm.
so I had to use like photo booth, like that little app photo booth
Yeah.
because it
Yeah.
I run a USB into it and thankfully it picked up an external camera and
Well,
shot individual pictures and then I had to import those into Harmony and then almost one by one and time it out. And it was like, sheesh, like
Well,
for what?
you may not have been working for the past year, but you're still working. That's for sure.
Yeah, I'm still very busy. So still, yeah, I mean, I'm not, yeah. And oftentimes I'll catch myself kind of sitting around going like, man, I got a ton of stuff to do. It's like, but too bad none of it generates actual revenue.
Right. Well, now that you've got these coming out, maybe those are, that'd be really cool to see. Why don't you give us the pitch? So we've talked about that you're making these, but for the audience that's listening, tell us what are these that you're making that you'd run a Kickstarter for it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So it's basically it's a science fiction action adventure story, that it's kind of like a swashbuckle, they're just, kind of like these random, stories, short stories that center around this main character, Veronica Daring, who's like a, young adventurer who just happens to dress really nicely as she goes on these things. And it's set in the Victorian era,
It's very steampunk
like
kind of.
very steampunk, yeah.
Yeah.
The like the late 1800s, that kind of thing, and right before the Industrial Revolution, and it's yeah, it involves a lot of fanciful, gadgets and creatures and just adventure.
Very, very Jules Verne-esque almost, would you say?
Yes, yeah, very much. Yeah, very Jules Verne, like, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea,
Yeah.
that kind of stuff.
It sounds very
Yeah.
cool. Is there something that inspired you as a kid or when you were younger that you really liked that, kind of is inspiring this, or just, that as a part of your wanting to get into animation in general, something you really loved?
Well, I mean, this is interesting how it kind of came to be. Yes, in twofold. Like one, I've always been interested in steampunk themed entertainment. I just didn't know what it was called. You know what I mean? For example, like I used to like that, like the old show in the '60s, Wild Wild West.
Sure, yeah, of course.
They remade the movie with Will
Yeah.
Smith.
There was
But,
the movie was a huge bomb, but the original TV
Yeah.
series was great back in the day. Yeah.
Yeah, it was great back in the day, and but it involves steampunk, and I also remember there was a time travel story called Voyagers, where they had like this little brass
Yes.
time travel. Do you remember?
Of course, I love that
You
show.
never know, like
No, Voyagers was great. I was so sad when that went off the air. Now there's a whole generation of people who have no idea what we're talking about. But that was, it was like a small, fit in the palm of your hand brass disc or something. They would twist whatever on it, and they would travel through time.
Right. It was like a little like pocket watch, but
Yeah.
it took them through time. It was a time travel story. So it was science fiction and it was really fun and stuff like that. So that aesthetic was always appealing to me. Now, jump forward, I don't know, what do you say, like 20 something years or so, maybe 30 years? Gosh, yeah, right? Like 30 years ago was the 70s, right? No.
No, it was the 90s, which is crazy.
Yes. Yeah. The thing is that I was at a point where like it was after Princess and the Frog, and we were trying to figure out like, okay, so what's next, right? It's like, let's keep this train going kind of thing. And, instead of waiting for, Disney or anybody else to come up with the next thing, it's like, why am I sitting around? I should be more proactive, well, why don't I come up with the next big thing? You know what I mean? And so I turned to my wife and I said, what would you do? Like what? I mean, because it's blue sky, right? You could do almost anything, And she was interested because she came at it from a different angle than I would have. And she said, she went like this. She kind of remembered, it was the Halloween prior to this when I had this notion that, she said, remember we went to our friend's house and they had that big Halloween display where they did their lawn display. And this guy, this friend of mine, he was amazing. He did this, it was a Jules Verne thing. He had this, he did like animatronics. He had things moving and it was huge. This was not like off the shelf stuff. He made this stuff. He welded the frame. I mean,
that's dedication for Halloween.
Serious dedication for Halloween. It was a Jules Verne thing. Well, we went to go see it. And when we were there, this group showed up all of a sudden out of nowhere, and they were all dressed in Victorian era garb, that kind of stuff. And what I discovered later is that they were
Hmm.
cosplayers who were there to take advantage of the decorations to be a backdrop for their photo shoot.
Yeah, sure.
But while they were there, we got to talking with them and stuff like that. And my wife said, she said, the feeling she to be in their presence, she had this real feeling and sense of what she described as enchantment, you know, this enchanted feeling. And she said, James, if you can get that feeling and sense of enchantment into an animated show, I think you'd have something. And so that's what it was. It was steampunk, is what it was.
Well, and it's really interesting that you say that because, and I'll credit the females in our lives. They operate on emotion sometimes more than we do, but we don't realize when we're watching something, you're connecting with it emotionally and for the feelings. Like we're thinking of you're trying to think of what's the concept and what's the hook and what's the story, and she's telling you, no, here's the feeling that this should have, and if you capture that feeling, people will be interested, and the story is almost irrelevant as long as you have that emotion behind it.
Yes, and that's exactly the way to put it. That's exactly what it was, because I was coming from a logical thing. I was like, "What's popular, sweetie? Like the pandas? What is it? What like a very logical thinking. Like what would tend to make money? Well, she wasn't thinking of making money. She was thinking of achieving a feeling. You see, so then it kind of progressed into like I wanted to kind of I consulted my friends about this, my close friends. Um, and, I wanted to, knowing how important story was, because everyone says story is king, which it
Hmm.
is. I believe it, and I did some preliminary drawings and I said, let's talk about the story. And they said, James, just, just start animating. That's what you do. Just start animating. I'm like, but to what? So what happened was my very first test was um, this test of this, young woman, which would eventually be like Veronica Daring, running around a corner with a ray gun, and she fires it, and she gets blown back while she's on an airship. The kickback of the gun, sends her flying backward. And everyone loved it, but then they were like, oh, but is she going to die? And I'm like, oh, why? Well, because she's flying back, she's going to go off the railing. Like, oh, shoot. Well, here, let me animate one more scene where I resolve that. And so I did that.
Yeah.
And then I realized still ended on a cliffhanger. And like, well, here, let me just add like one or two more shots where before I knew it, I had like this 30-second situation that
Hmm.
kind of formed a story by default. And people, at least the ones that I was close to, loved it. So I knew that I was definitely onto something. So then it was just a matter of like, okay, now seriously, where do I take this? What do I want to do with this? Where do I, where do I go?
And
And that's when I started.
did you end up writing the story then yourself for it, or did you have somebody else come in and help, or like kind of a collaboration?
Yeah, I wrote the story myself, although I did have a friend of mine come in and take a look at it and say, what do you think of this? Would you do anything different to it? And I don't know if they gave me any stuff, but it was pretty much my story.
Hmm.
I know one of them was I just wanted to see steampunk race cars. Like that's all I knew. I said I just need to see a car race with that, and so I needed to come up with a story, and then there was another one where I was like thinking, well, what if she was kind of like kind of Bruce Wayne, like like a Batman, kind of like a superhero, like a
Hmm.
steampunk superhero. I said, well, okay, let's make her a superhero. But what would you have as a villain? And then everything kind of fell into place where it was like, well, let me see. Like Batman has the Joker, who has like is all about big grin stuff. It's like, well, what in Victorian era? Who would be the Joker back in Victorian era? And like, well, what about the Cheshire Cat from Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland?
Yeah.
Yeah, like you remember that character? Yeah, that would be a kind of a devious character. That would be awesome. And so then there you go there, and then There's another one where it's like, like the fourth one is about, like a Jules Verne mechanical creatures on a mysterious island. You know what I mean? It's like, what could I do with that? And then it's one of these things where it also my story things start usually with a couple of scenarios or scenes which I know I definitely want to see.
Yeah.
And then the challenge is, well, how do I create that connective tissue between those things to create the narrative,
Right.
and
Well, and the nice
and
thing
then,
is, you've not been a writer during your career, but you've worked on
no,
so many projects over 30 years that it's ingrained in you on how to tell a story. And
yeah,
so while you may not be like a writer by trade, you're a storyteller anyways. And so once you get into it,
yeah,
you just start developing it and you're able to, you know, do both.
yeah. It's more visual storytelling. That's
Hmm.
why I say, like, when I talk about being a writer, I almost say it's mix, semantics here. It's like,
Yeah.
well, nobody actually writes. Shouldn't they be called typers, right? Because that's technically what we do. Well, hey, now, you don't even have to do that now. Now you have dictation. You can
Yeah.
actually, dictate it. But I think it's more about, it's just what kind of imagination do you have?
Yeah.
Where does your mind go? And then how well are you able to visualize your own imagination in a form that is palatable for others to experience and embrace,
Yeah, it's really interesting. Now,
challenge.
have you dove into sort of other forms like comic books or graphic novels or anything like that? Obviously, you're an artist, and you can draw. And so, have you strictly stuck with animation, or have you done anything in sort of comic book or graphic novel world?
Um, well, let's see. No, I never really made comic books. I mean, I do like my own Halloween decorations and stuff. So that's how I use my creativity. Like I even do like a walkthrough, attraction, if you will.
That's cool.
And one of them was a Alice in Wonderland themed. Another one was Indiana Jones themed. And so I like to create, if you will, experiences for people, some kind of
Sounds
entertainment.
sounds like between you and your friends, I need to come out to Glendale for Halloween. That'd be pretty cool out there.
Yeah. Yeah, actually it is. So yeah, so I've been working with these friends of mine that, I do their flyers, their advertisement flyers for them, and so, I'll use those skills there, almost like making a movie poster,
Yeah.
advertising, their hunt. And I would even help them design things like, like almost like being a concept artist, but for an attraction as opposed to a film, which
Right.
is very much in tune with, like, Mark Davis, in which I don't know if you notice my uh, office is haunted mansion themed
Yeah, I
because
saw in the background there. I see
you can kind of see, like,
the
I'll
LED.
lift it up here. You
The
kind of see, like, I have like the stretching portraits from,
Yep.
you know,
Yeah,
uh,
I saw the stretching portrait, and I was going to ask you. I was like, "That's Haunted Mansion." I've been to Haunted Mansion many times in Orlando, living in Florida for many years. So always love that. Probably my favorite Disney ride of all the parks and everything else, and the whole Star Wars world and all that kind of stuff. I just still love Haunted Mansion.
yeah, I love it because, well, for a few things, is because I remember being so afraid of it when I was a little kid. And then I think at some point when I was like in my preteen years, I didn't go to Disneyland for a while and then came back. And then all of a sudden when I went on it, I was surprised. Why am I not afraid of this anymore? And if anything, I was actually kind of amused by it because I could see that there were some kind of gags
Yeah,
in there, like, oh my gosh, that's so funny. Like, they're, and I looked at it through a different lens because of, I guess, I don't know, it's a maturity thing or something, but I realized, like, the power of how, like, the effect certain subjects can have on age groups of people
hmm
and still be universally entertaining amongst all of them. And also the fact that, Mark Davis, who was one of Walt Disney's nine old men, animators who, as you know, animated, Maleficent from Sleeping Beauty and along with Sleeping Beauty, Aurora, and I forget over all the other ones, but he did a lot of the concept art. Walt picked him to do the concepts for the rides, for the attractions, Haunted Mansion and Pirates of the Caribbean, because he had training as an animator in being able to tell a story visually and be able to stage it with composition. And so it was very inspiration for me because it showed me that my abilities, my training, and experience as an animator is not just bound to the pegboard. You know,
Yeah.
it can be applied to all different things. And even as my my daughter was going through school and they were having school plays, I could even find that I could even help them design their theatrical sets. Like I
Right.
remember do sketches for them, like, okay, well, here's how the set is going to look like, and this is what we need to build, and this is how you'll build it. And, so it was like, yeah, it really kind of said that, my skills are more than, transcend, beyond the page, you know.
Yeah.
Uh,
That's
so,
awesome. Well, if there was a that next job was the dream job, something you've always wanted to work on, what is that? What would that be for you?
yeah, that is a good question. I would love to do, obviously, well, I love to do theme park design. I love
Yeah.
to create, a theme park thing. But, going back to film, I would love to do a hand-drawn film that has a very cinematic feel, but that is akin to something that the Japanese would
Hmm.
would achieve through, like anime and stuff, or maybe, the way I kind of look at it is like what I was really kind of trying to do in part with Hullabaloo is take the best of what I consider to be the main regions of animation production, that being, like, Japan anime, European, like European styling, maybe with Western articulation, you see?
Yeah.
Because, the Japanese animation, that it's very, very limited in its movement many times. The European thing has this very artsy feel to it, very, that kind of stuff. Whereas, Japanese, is also very cinematic, but it's also very dark. But in European, like, but then there's Western animation, Disney animation, if you will, which I'm generalizing now as since it's no longer existed. Western animation has this articulation with their characters that I think gives it its appeal, that I think is what I want to blend all together into something that's enchanting,
Yeah.
does just that, and is held to the standards that we've come to know to this day. You know what I mean? So, I get a kick nowadays, honestly, if you ask me, like, when people take a look at my work and they go, it's so smooth. And I just laugh. I'm like, you mean it's done proper is what you're trying
Right.
to
Yeah.
say.
They're like, is that a
Like,
compliment?
yeah, it's like,
I'm not
I
sure.
mean, it's a compliment, but you realize that it comes from a place of like how long it has been since
Yeah.
people have seen this in play. You know what I mean?
And
Like,
that's such an interesting description, right? Smooth, like not, there's plenty of other words that they could have chosen, but smooth is the word to describe, what the
right,
style basically of
right,
the old
yeah,
school hand drawn animation.
yeah, exactly. And so I go with it. I'm saying whatever, as long as they like it. So
Right. Yeah.
if it's a positive thing, great. They can call it whatever they want. I mean, it's like, if they want to call it hand drawn instead of 2D, I don't care. You know what I mean? If they want, or whatever it is. I was saying, well, maybe 2D needs a form of branding readjustment. Maybe it's
Hmm.
like, it's like graphite infused pulp, or organic. You know what I mean?
Right.
Something
Yeah.
to kind of like
That's
give
great.
give marketing a chance to do something with it. I don't know, but the point is like, I want to, there's this thing about, 2D is dead. Is it still alive? For me, it's like really about keeping it what I call in good practice. You
Hmm.
know what I mean? I kind of feel like where I'm at in a way is like kind of trying to keep it up for the next generation to be able to keep it going. You know what I mean? It's kind of like, when you're at a concert and you bring the beach ball, you're kind of you're kind of keeping it up, trying to keep it away from security who constantly wants to puncture it,
Right.
stuff like that. So it's like that's what it kind of feels like right now is like, we're in this in-between era where like a lot of us pros are, slowly retiring and
But
reducing
I think there's a desire to still see that. It looks so good and the quality is so great. And and I think everyone is so used to seeing, 3D CGI kind of stuff that when you see something like that it just looks awesome, that it has even more of an impact because you don't see it as often.
Right, exactly. And exactly, and that's exactly it. So, I'm just thankful that people still respond to it in that way.
Yeah.
I keep thinking of a world where it could have easily have been different, where it really does feel like passe, where it's like, oh God, like you're still, like what is it? Like like old production means or something like that we used to do back in the day, but it's like, no, it's still valid, it's still a valid art form. And my wife said, she had again to her brilliance, I asked her, like, is it ever going to go away? And she said, well, as long as children are their first um, way of creating art is to hold a crayon or a
Yeah.
pencil, whatever it always be, because going back to the beginning of our conversation, that's where it happened.
Hmm.
Since like I said, since I was a toddler and I could first hold a pencil, that is where it happened.
Yeah.
That's from that very moment led to this very day. And that's where it happens, now it might be different if like, those babies, are given mouse, and they're
They're going
starting
to
like,
have
well,
carpal tunnel by the time they're 5 from clicking on the
yeah, or
mouse.
something like
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
But I think that's where it is. That's where it gets you when you first realize the power. And when I say the power, I mean like when I can't tell you as an artist that feeling when there is nothing there. It's a blank slate, and that's what I get a kick about animation is that there is a blank piece of paper on Monday, and come Friday there is going to be arguably like 100 pieces of paper with something on it.
Hmm.
And then I'm going to shoot it. And the thing that I loved is every Friday, magic would happen.
Yeah.
I would shoot it one frame at a time, and then the computer would play it back to me at speed, and then it escapes you. It it takes on a life of its own. And you think to yourself, you think like, I know that I had a hand in this, but still for the life of me, I can't figure out how or why it's done. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? It takes on a life of its own, and now it belongs to something else. It's released from you now, but you still have a sense of pride and feeling of accomplishment to say like you created something that oddly lives and breathes, but yet doesn't at the same time. It's weird,
Yeah. I think
and
that's really cool.
never get tired of
Yeah,
it.
and that's the like you said, that's the magic of it all, and that's the
Right.
beauty of it is you get a blank paper. Next thing you know, it's this thing that lives and breathes that can be out in the world for everybody else to see. Well,
Yeah.
James, we're gonna have to wrap up. I really have enjoyed our conversation today. Thank you so much for taking the time to log on and chat with us, and thanks so much for being on the Dallas Film Podcast.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. It was good to be here. Thank you for asking me.
Yeah.
Okay.